Hi, welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick and co-host is Chris Lucian. And today we're definitely very excited to have Seb Rose on the show. We got some great topics lined up, including the best practice fallacy, dispassionate professionalism, and sustainability. And if we have some time, we'll get to some BDD stuff. Before we jump to those, Seb, do you mind introducing yourself for our
Hi.
audience?
Yeah, my name's Seb Rose. I'm currently in Scotland. I live in Scotland. It's dark. I wish I was somewhere where the sun was shining and it was warm, but there's a storm. I've been a software developer since 1980. In the past 15 years, I've been moving towards being more of an agile practitioner, an agile coach and consultant. And maybe 10 years ago, I got involved with Cucumber and behavior-driven development through my meeting with Aslak Housoy and Matt Wynn. I am currently, what do we say? I'm currently between engagements. I had a permanent job for 3 or 4 years after Cucumber got acquired. But what with the global situation, they let a lot of people go, including the whole of the Cucumber team. So we're all out there looking for things to do. I'm actually very busy, not working in Agile or BDD, or in fact, even anything to do with computers most of the time at the moment. But I'm always on the lookout for something interesting to get my teeth into.
Right on, right on. Okay, cool. Thanks for that background. And yeah, I'm really curious to dive into these topics. So the first one is the quote unquote best practice fallacy. Yeah, what are your thoughts here?
Well, I grew up and I grew up and worked in many organizations and listened to many speakers and read many books that said that this is best practice. And I think I knew instinctively that a lot of these best practices, we tried them and they hadn't worked. And I just wasn't sure what was wrong because, the people that were telling me that they were best practice, well, they weren't trying to yank my chain. They had used these practices and it had worked for them. And I was confused. Why were best practices not always best? And, along the way, I became a consultant. And what's the consultant's favorite statement?
Best practice.
No,
Yeah,
I was thinking
depends.
it depends, right?
Yes.
Exactly. And of course,
Depends
there's
on
a
the
lot of
consultant then.
contextual stuff in there. And in fact, it was only when I started listening to, I guess it was Dave Snowden talking about Cynefin and complexity, that I realized what I'd been missing all these years, which is that best practices are fine for I can't remember if he calls it simple domain anymore, but for simple and complicated areas, best practices can be good. But unfortunately, most of the challenges that we face are not simple or complicated, they're complex. Especially when you're talking about agile teams, organizations being mean to their teams, all these sorts of things. These are to do with socio-technical systems, and these are complex. And in complex systems, best practices don't work, or at least they may work today, but that doesn't mean they'll work tomorrow. And the thing that didn't work yesterday might be just what you need next week. So I think there's no, and this seems to be quite a broadly understood thing among people that I often speak to, and yet the words best practice still creep into conference talks and blog posts and books and pundits talking. And so, I think I don't take it upon myself, but when I spot it, I do generally go, is it really a best practice? Or is it just a good practice for the context that you used it in?
Yeah. I recently heard it. I think we were in a conversation, and I think one of us asked the why question. And the answer was, well, it's because it's best practice. And I don't think the person meant, negative intent or anything, but it's almost like it's my kids are studying a fallacy book. And so they're really good at pointing out red herrings. It's where you don't answer the question. And so it's almost like an answer, but not an answer. Right. Mm-hmm. And so well, why in this context is this the thing to do or something? Right. And Yeah, what's your general response when people say it, I guess, as like an answer to the question?
So, I mean, I think probably I'm probably pretty obnoxious. I go, I'm not sure that it's a best practice. I think it might be a good practice, but I've also seen that backfire a number of times because generally it does. These best practices do backfire. I mean, what really sucks is that a lot of the things that get sold as best practice are actually bad practices. So they're not even contextually good. They're just, please don't do this. We learned not to do this years ago.
Waterfall is best practice for software development, is it?
That sort of thing. Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. Yeah. So the distinction between best and good, I think, I guess best, it entails it'll work in any situation, like a universal solution or something, right? Where like it kind of reminds me, this is kind of geeky, but like in ethics and philosophy, they distinguish between you ought to do something versus it's good to do something. So it's like it's good to be a doctor, but everyone doesn't have to be a doctor. You don't ought to be a doctor, kind of thing. And so yeah, so I think you're right. Like if you were to replace it with, hey, here's a good practice, that seems to have less onus on that it shall be done now or something, right? Yeah.
Actually, hearing you say good practice now, I even wonder whether that's a good word. And what I'm thinking of now is which sort of harps forward towards the sustainability thing that we're going to talk about later. But that people, when they would think about what technologies were useful for different cultures and in different parts of the world, and they came up with a concept of appropriate technology, right? So a technology may be neutral or beneficial morally, but it may be inappropriate in one setting, whereas it's appropriate in another. So maybe what I'm really thinking about is appropriate practices.
Yeah.
I tend to focus on habits too, and the habits and practices could be like kind of a similar thing, but I think saying it's a good habit to have versus it's best practice to do this. I think it has some subtlety to it as well.
Yeah, there's nuance there. I guess the worst thing about the term best practice is that it basically says, do not argue with me here. I am not talking personally. I am talking with the whole weight of the industry behind me, and you can't possibly argue this is best practice. I've been doing this for 2 decades. You can't do any better. And that's just a nasty way to run a team or even engage with an individual.
Yeah, and I guess I think that's a key point, is that there are explicit and subtle ways to kind of stop the flow of brainstorming and conversation and innovation and psychological safety. And I'm wondering if using that phrase is subtle or maybe explicit way to try to shut it down, right? Where if you want everyone putting their cards on the table to help us come up with the best thing, if you throw that card on the table, it's kind of like everyone else take your cards off almost. Could be what someone means by it. Yeah. And yeah, so I mean, you talked about appropriate practice, and I think this is always a struggle, because I feel like there's kind of a paradox in the industry that it's you want to give people good options of like, hey, here is a way, but I'm not saying this is the only way. And even when I'm careful, sometimes I'll talk to someone and they're like, I'm still hearing you as saying this is the only way to do it. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying. Are there any ways you kind of set the context when you're talking with people or whatever to kind of make it clear that you're just sharing a practice that works in a context or something like that? I don't know.
Yeah, so I'm probably not very good at but I have been given a conference talk for a few years now, which goes to a few of the agile I'm not sure whether they actually sell them as best practice, but things like the INVEST acronym, or the structure of a user story statement, all these things have been, they get repeated over and over again in agile books and on blog posts, and there'll be 5-minute TikTok videos about them and what have you. But in reality, they're applicable in some situations, but actually there's some confusion in them. The people misunderstand, for instance, what valuable means, or even small. So what I've been saying is that really all of these pieces of advice should really be structured in a pattern format. So I'm talking here about Christopher Alexander pattern format, going through Gang of Four, etc., where you talk about the context or the forces in which this pattern is applicable, and then not only do you limit yourself to say we have seen this work in these contexts, but then you go on to say, and the resulting context will have these constraints, or these are the things that you might expect once you follow this practice. So a pattern structure is a really powerful way of doing it. Like I said, I'm not sure I always couch any advice or any statement I make in that format, but that's what I'm looking for, and that's what I encourage teams to look for. Some expert that is sufficiently enlightened's the wrong word, but sufficiently aware of the broad set of context that a piece of advice might be taken in, so that they couch every piece of advice in well, these are the contexts that I've seen it work in, and these are the results of applying it, and you might have to do something to cope with these resulting forces as well.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, and I think you're right. If you add, you have your advice statement. If you add if context so and so advice, and then I think there's something really winsome about stating the cons of the advice you just gave too, right? You know what I mean? You want to be honest, right? So you want to tell them that too. But I also think it shows that you're offering your advice not blindly or wildly or just saying slogans. It's like you're aware that with people and engineering things, there's always pros and cons. There's no, there's always gonna, if you optimize for this, you're not optimizing for these things over here, right? And so I guess it depends what matters most to you and that kind of thing. And I think that it's kind of the opposite of saying best practice, right? Because it gives the hearer kind of liberty and a kind of implicit autonomy to be like, I want those pros, or I don't want those cons, right? Or that is or is not my context, And so, as opposed to do it.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, the slight difficulty is that actually people don't want to be given choices. Generally they want to be told, this is what you've got to do. And I know, because I've done this everywhere. So you go to the doctor, and if the doctor said to you, well, I think you should take this medicine, but it's got all these side effects, and the last person I gave it to died. It was terrible. This is not sort of advice you want, right? You want to go, hey, this is the miracle cure. And that's why the medicine man used to come into town with his patent medicine was always very popular, because you didn't have to go for a diagnosis. There weren't lots and lots of tests, and didn't try things. You just said, this is going to work. And it generally didn't.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny because me and my wife have talked about that before. Like, what kind of doctor do we want? Because we've had doctors that actually do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
They like brainstorm with you, and I think in some situations that works really well, to give an obvious example, a 5-year-old who can't understand and will just get scared, that's probably not the situation to do that. So I mean, I think that's true. I'm trying to remember what book it was. I think it was I always botch the title, Thinking Fast and Slow. Yeah. Yeah. In that book, it talked about how the market is looking for gurus with hard and fast answers for everything, or something like that. And so how to be marketable without overselling, I guess, is a difficult thing.
Yeah, it's tricky because people do want the expert that can sort their problem. You come and say, well, maybe 70% chance I'll sort your problem. They might go looking for someone who says, I can do it 100%.
Yeah.
And at times they want somebody just to blame, right? So
That's always good
The
as well.
trap, yeah.
So I mean, I don't know if this is in any way related, but I'm going to tell a wee story about someone I knew that qualified as a general practitioner, a doctor in the UK, and he was working on an island out west in Scotland, and he basically decided that homeopathy was really what he was into. None of this proper medicine, none of this modern medicine, pharmaceuticals. So when someone came to him with a problem, he didn't really know that much about homeopathy, I don't think, because what he used to do, he used a pendulum on a string, and he had a piece of paper with all the different homeopathic preparations on it, and he just used the string pendulum to divine which preparation it was that he should give. And I said, well, you're on a wee island. Have you got all those preparations on the island with you? He said, no. So if I divine a preparation that I'm not supposed to use, or that I don't have rather, what I do is I write the name of the preparation on a piece of paper, and I take some distilled water and I stand it on top of the name overnight, and then I use that. And he said he got really good results. So maybe, maybe going back, maybe there are best practices. I don't know.
Maybe as long as you just don't know that's what's going on behind the scenes, then
yeah. So I mean, so what are we talking about here? We're talking about a placebo effect, aren't we? So bring in an expert and that'll make everything better just because we've got an expert in the room. Sometimes that makes it work.
Yeah, and I remember from that same book, it was talking about how some highly paid gurus, their advice had the same results as random advice, or something, right? Yeah. And so that's kind of like the illustration you gave. So yeah, is it when you're in such a VUCA world that's so dynamic, that there can't be known in advance. Yeah, that's tough.
So maybe that's so is this good place to pivot? So is the best practice fallacy a reason for dispassionate professionalism, or you want to jump into the topic?
Yeah, I'm not sure that I've never really thought about them at the same time, but I have thought about them both a fair amount. I mean, I give a lightning talk, or have been giving a lightning talk for maybe 7 or 8 years, called "Are You Passionate?" I'm sure I can find you a link so that you can add it to the show notes. Basically, I recall maybe 15, 20 years ago when I was a contractor, I was beginning to see job adverts that were looking for passionate professionalism, as a passionate software developer or a passionate front-end engineer. And so I was thinking, passion didn't mean that when I was growing up, right? Passion was, maybe on one level, the passion of Christ, and another was passion for someone that you love very much, like your family or your lover. I didn't want that sort of thing at work, right? And and so I just riffed on it. So I mean, it's a fun lightning talk. I don't really mind if people talk about being passionate, because I know actually what they mean. They mean that they're engaged, that they're keen, that they're excited about something. But I wonder if that's passion, or whether we've just devalued the word passion.
Yeah. No, that's a good That's a good point, that it can. What's that? Is it kind of like a semantic diffusion of the original meaning, right? And I think, I find myself doing that same thing. You even, I almost thought that you put that as a topic, because we asked that when you sign up to be on the show. What are some topics you're passionate about? And I'm like, oh, we just set them up to talk about being dispassionate. But I think when we use it in that kind of sense, it's like what you said, like keen. And now after reading the grit book, I almost feel like it translates to grit more than anything else, I guess is what I'm really trying to say.
Explain grit. Sorry.
Angela Duckworth. Grit is the idea of persevering through adversity or difficulty, like learning a new language, or learning an instrument, or a new programming language that is maybe more esoteric. Like being gritty about something, I think, is just this idea of like continuing on, right?
Yeah. And I think so. and I guess I use the word ambiguously. So like for the show, for example, having someone who's excited about a topic is a great conversation.
Yeah.
But when you hire someone, if someone's really excited about front-end development or whatever, or XP, but they don't know how to do it or something, it becomes less important. So I guess in like a job format, I guess probably the word I'm really looking for is grit or something like that. Someone who has principles and practices and habits or something that will stand through perseverance or something through
We should
resistance.
change it on the sign-up form. Just what are you gritty about?
Well, yeah, although I'm not sure they're the same though.
Yeah.
So grit is like you said, dogged and perseverance, and because now that you've explained it, I know exactly what you mean. Like True Grit, the movie, exactly that sort of thing. You're going to keep going. But here we're talking about, are you engaged? Do you have some enthusiasm about it? But so passion though, I think it's a further out on the spectrum. It's a sort of thing. A passionate person is someone who, if they propose an architecture, for instance, and somebody questions them, they might get upset and they might shout at people or think that they're being somehow dissed. Whereas, like, no, don't invest in these things. This is you've come up with an idea. Other people have got different ideas. We want you to be engaged and keen to discuss. Whereas I think passion can sometimes be all-consuming.
Yeah.
I see what you mean. Yeah. So kind of like Midsummer's Night Dream passion, where where once they have it, once they have the passion, they're stuck to that person, right? It's unreflective, all-consuming. Yeah, definitely. That's not what we mean. Yeah,
no,
so I think you're right. Yeah,
I know that's not what you mean, but that's what I think of. And in fact, in the lightning talk, what I did was I then went and found a job description for a hospital consultant, and I replaced it. And I began to use the word passionate in there, replace some of the words with passionate, and it didn't sound right at all. You don't want a passionate doctor, right? If you go with the bedside manner, and that's exactly the wrong thing. You want someone who's clinical. You want someone who's calm. You want someone who's dispassionate, who's going to tell you this is what you need to do, or at least these are the things that are going to happen to you if you continue smoking, for instance. So I'm pretty happy with Dispassionate.
I'll have to stop sleeping next to my C# syntax book because I'm just so passionate about it.
Really excellent. I actually once read there was a book about so Microsoft released a managed C++. I'm not sure if it's still extant, whether it still exists, but I read that book 3 or 4 times because it felt like properly esoteric. It was it was the sort of thing where you probably did have to sacrifice chickens and run around to make everything work. I never managed to get a job in it. I never actually ever saw an environment where they were using it, but it did sound like really quite a technical step too far to try and get something to work in a managed environment.
Yeah. Nice. And so while you were just talking, I actually looked up the word, and it says a strong emotion that's intractable or barely controllable. And it's so funny. Yeah, I've never. You're right. Like if you put that in the way that it's like, no, we don't want you to be out of control
or intractable. Right? We want to be able to talk to you and come to a consensus.
I'm passionate about microservices architecture, right? It's like, okay, now no one can reason with you.
I see. Okay.
And that does happen, doesn't it? People find a solution like that. It's the old story about for a man or a woman with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So your microservices expert will maybe suggest microservices whether or not they're appropriate.
One kind of follow-up question on that is, now that I see the kind of barely controllable aspect of the meaning, and now I get why you say dispassionate professionalism, but it almost, like, if I don't think about it carefully, I wonder if it almost reads as people who don't care. Like, like a dispassionate doctor sounds to me like someone who doesn't care about me and it's just following the protocol for my good or not, just trying to get the job done. So the patient's out in 5 minutes and he completes his ticket, you know? And so I'm trying to wonder if there's a phrase to not make it sound like people don't care. You know, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't know is the honest answer. For me, dispassionate doesn't mean you don't care.
Okay.
But it means that you're not going to go off like a tinderbox if someone says, "Are you sure?" Right?
Yes.
It's not the same as disinterested either, you know.
Okay.
And I only use it I only put it on my profile basically so that I can start this sort of conversation and go, right, passion isn't what you want. You want people that are engaged, keen, enthusiastic, dedicated. There's the English language is absolutely rammed full of exactly the words that you want. Why do we have to use passion? I'd love to know who first started using passionate in this sort of depleted sense.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
I think what I like, so I think being passionate about your habits can be good, right? Like, so I'm going to exercise every day and I'm passionate about exercising or something, versus I'm passionate about the type of exercise. I'm passionate about sit-ups. And so I only do sit-ups, and I have really weak arms and like a really strong core, and like, and so I almost think that that passion is kind of just like a subset of it, or if you zoom out, it's like, maybe I'm passionate about programming. That's something I want to spend my time doing on, but I don't want to be passionate about any particular language where, but then even then, if something displaces programming one day, then do you want to be truly passionate about it? So
Yeah.
you might zoom out even farther. Like maybe it's a scoping thing. I'm passionate about problem solving, and I get to do that in software. And so I'm kind of reminded of the word ikigai. It's like the Japanese word it actually has an English definition now as well. But it's like what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you're good at all align. And so the Venn diagram intersects. And so I feel like you're kind of talking about the concept of ikigai in that and dispassionate professionalism. I think you can be professional and you can like what you do and be passionate about the aspects of your work, but you're dispassionately professional. Being dispassionately professional, I think you're saying, is a good thing, because passion means not being flexible and not looking at the reality objectively, right? And so it's like objective professionalism might be another way to put it.
Yeah, objective would be good too. But the thing is that that wouldn't start any conversations, because everyone of course. And the reality is none of us are really objective, are we? So I mean, we're all biased and have our own take on things. But no, I get it. No, objectivity would be a good one.
And like objectivity. And I think what you're saying, Chris, reminded me of in the Atomic Habit books, it talks about being careful with where you put your identity. So like if your identity is a business owner and then you retire, then you're depressed, right? Because that's who you are, right? And so and so you're right. If your passion can be a very good thing, but it has to be about something almost immovable, or like something that's always good, right? Or else passion about the wrong thing could be very detrimental. But you're right. Okay, so going back to the Cynefin Framework, you don't want to be passionate about a best practice, a quote unquote best practice.
No, exactly.
They feel related, right?
And actually going back to Cynefin Framework, I'd like to say you shouldn't be passionate about the Cynefin Framework, because there's an awful lot of that going on as well. We're sort of segueing from Cynefin Framework to Wardley mapping, but there's definitely people nail their colors to a particular thing. And both the Cynefin and Wardley maps, they're really useful things, but they appear to be far more omnipresent by looking at the blogs and listening to the conference talks than actually when you get out into industry and see what people are doing.
I
Again,
find
are
that
they best practices, or are they just good in some contexts?
I find introducing Cynefin Framework or wordly mapping, all of a sudden, I think the beauty of the two frameworks is that people all of a sudden realize that, like, oh, I'm being a little bit unreasonable about how I'm talking about this thing, right? I love wordly mapping for just like, oh, we're going to custom build this software, and it's like, and the moment you say like that's already a commodity, like people like lose it almost. And so I think that yeah, I think we don't see acknowledgement of both of those things, because it's so attractive to ignore it, and really dig in, and you know, sunken cost fallacy and all that stuff too.
So tell me more. What do you think is attractive about ignoring, for instance, Cynefin and wordly mapping?
Well, so my guess is that people like stability. So Cynefin is like the acknowledgement of instability, or the acknowledgement that there's some things that you cannot master, right? And people, I think, just in general don't like acknowledging that. And I think that there's kind of this trap where, you know, if you were never taught about the Cynefin framework, then I think it's very easy to just ignore the signs that it's there, and until, you know, someone is so frustrated that people are behaving in such a way that they have to outline something like that. And wordly mapping, I think you see it all the time with sunk cost fallacy and other things. It's like something was innovative and became a commodity, and then and as it's been commoditized, it's like, oh, you know, it kind of gets into that space of like, oh, well, we didn't write it here, so, you know, we don't use that. And so you know, I think I've especially seen it when something has become a commodity when it wasn't before. There's a lot of uncertainty and instability, and so I just think it's attractive because they, you know, it's convenient to ignore them until things get really bad. And
do you think that sometimes the passion with which wordly mappers and Cynefin practitioners embrace their practices is also a bit of a turnoff? I mean, I remember that Liz Keogh was doing some sort of thinkings, I guess, maybe 5-6 years ago in London, and Matt took along a colleague of his to one of these, and the colleague came out at the end of the day, he was just totally frustrated, and he said, Cynefin, it's just two bums kissing.
I will never be able to unsee that image. So I think, I don't know, most times when I've seen Cynefin or wordly mapping introduced into a context, I feel like it's someone realizing that something they were hoping for is now gone, or like, you know, destroyed in some way. And so I feel like when you're in that conversation, you almost have to be prepared to, you know, it's as if you're going into a conversation with a friend, and you're saying like, I'm about to disappoint you, but this is what I'm going to tell you, right? But we don't do that in business. We're just like, let's put it all on a wordly map, and then everybody has to deal with their internal trauma about their worldview being shifted so hard. And so I don't know. There's something in my mind, kind of in the back of my mind, that says that that Cynefin and wordly maps have to be introduced with a great deal of empathy. Otherwise, you know, especially because I think they're extraordinarily useful when talking cross-functionally, and but cross-functionally is the number one place where you're most likely to destroy like friendships or relationships, working relationships that are, so dispassionate professionalism, like if the person on the other side of the table is passionate and you show them a wordly map and call what they've been doing a commodity, then it's kind of insulting. Right?
Yeah. So is it insulting though, or is it just something that they will take insult from?
Yeah. They would take insult to, and that's why we value psychological safety and radical candor, right? Is because if it is unsafe to give people critical feedback, or if they will take it personally, then you're at an extraordinary risk to bring dysfunction to the team. So maybe that's the way to put it, is the Cynefin Framework and wordly maps, you may want to introduce them only after you've established a precedent of psychological safety among the team. But often I see them most used to be like, hey, look, like you're in this quadrant of Cynefin, but we're actually working in this quadrant of it's like, okay, well, so you come out of that with maybe damage to the relationship or something.
Fair point. Yeah. I mean, whenever you're engaged with a group of people, even a single individual, you're in whether you think about it or not, you're in some sort of coaching relationship.
Yeah.
There's going to be a power gradient, and you need to be mindful of the impact of your words.
I think the book Helping is especially good. It talks about like a consulting relationship, and also it was a fantastic book for just the relationship of like the person being helped and the helper, and it has this kind of notation of one up, one down, and the relationship, in like if you're being helped, then there's a need for balance, and it talks about our relationship with doctors, consultants, friends who are giving us advice. So anybody that's struggling in this area, I would recommend that book.
Right.
Nice. I had one thought on I thought you asked a great question, Seb, on what's so attractive about fast universal answers. And I think it's basically kind of what Chris said with the establishing psychological safety first, because that's foundational. And it almost reminds me of like the kind of classic Socrates quote, the unexamined life is not worth living. And I think if you have the habit of like, here's where I'm at now, I think TDD and XP is great for these contexts, and it has these pros and cons, but I'm open to be persuaded out of that, right? And so, but if you're so passionate that is never the case, you can't even critically examine it and receive feedback from it, you're in a place where the critical assumptions can't be questioned. And so you're just kind of looking for, give me the quick answer to this problem, and I remember the Thinking Fast and Slow book said that too, that unless you go into, I can't never get it right, system 1 or system 2, the one that's like slows down and does that critical life kind of thinking, it strongly prefers a very quick answer. And if you don't give it one, it'll make up one, even if it's not, the question you're asking. And so I feel like maybe someone who's like locked into, we're not in critical examination mode where we're questioning our assumptions, and give me a quick answer so I can get moving again. You know what I mean? Yeah. They are not in a place to hear Cynefin or any of these things that question all the assumptions. Yeah.
There's a really good exercise. I got it from Laurent Bossovit, but I think he got it from somewhere else. And Kevlin Henney uses it as well. It's a wonderful one in workshops or conference talks. And you ask 10 new questions that have numerical answers, right? But they're not numerical answers that anybody in the room is going to know what they are. So such as, how many ISO standard shipping containers are there in the world? Okay, something like that. Or how many million decaliters of wine did France produce in 1987? These sort of questions. And you tell people that what they have to do, they have to respond with an upper and lower bound within which the answer should fall with a 90% probability. Okay, so that's all you got to do, right? So there are lots of strategies where you could achieve that 90% success rate. However, almost everybody who plays this game, even when they try and put a range in that is not precise, is way too precise, right? Their precision completely outstrip their desire for precision completely outstrips their ability to have confidence. And so the average, and I've run this dozens of times with hundreds of people, and the average number of answers where they actually get out of 10 questions that they get within the range is 2 or 3. Right. So they're getting a confidence level of 20 or 30%, which is nowhere near 90. Whereas if you said somewhere between 0 and 20 billion, you would be right for all of them. So you could do for 9 of them 0 and 20 billion, then go a bit more precise on them, and then you'd be much closer to the 90%. We don't like that. We like certainty. And as professionals, when somebody asks us a question, we're used to, or at least we assume, that if we give too vague an answer, someone's going to say, no, I need more precision than that. And that, we could start talking about estimates at this point, because it's like, actually, when it comes to estimating things, you got to give a big range, especially when you don't know what you're talking about, right at the beginning of a project. But if you said, well, it's going to be somewhere between 2 weeks and 2 years, people, rightly, folk would go, that's not very useful. It's like, yeah, but I don't have any information to give you anything better than that at the moment. And so it's a really good game. It's a really good practice, and it does demonstrate, and it's demonstrated to me and lots of folk, that we feel like we're being pushed as professionals to be precise, even when we don't have the knowledge or the data to be precise, and we're not prepared then to go, look, I just don't know.
So in the interest of time, let's hit the sustainability topic too before we jump off here. What do you want to talk about there?
Well, I guess I want to talk about this year's Agile Alliance conference, which took place in Orlando and in Edinburgh in Scotland. And it was a really excellent experiment or initiative on the part of the Agile Alliance to try and provide the experience and the benefit of attending a really wonderful conference without having to travel many thousands of miles in jetliners to sit in an air-conditioned biodome in a very hot state in the United States, right? And this came from a panel that took place in Nashville last year at the Agile Alliance conference, which was run by Lisa Adkins, and she had 4 really great women talking about their work in sustainable space. And I think, we kind of don't talk about it very much in IT. We've got data centers that are churning out kilowatts of air conditioning. We've got Zoom, but we still travel to go and see folk around the world. There's lots of things that we could be doing. And I think most of us, maybe this is culturally, I'm in my little echo chamber. I think most of us realize that probably the scientists aren't out to try and create a new world order by lying about, industrial emissions of carbon and other greenhouse gases, and that we really do have a challenge that's a global in scale, and we just don't appear to be grasping it as a global challenge in a way that it really feels like we ought to be, if not for us, but for our children and our children's children.
Sure.
It reminds me of when the pandemic hit and we were doing remote mob programming. It caused me to read more closely one of the remote mob programming books called Remote Mob Programming. But one of their main bullets was save the planet. Daily commuting causes traffic jams, crowded trains, significant greenhouse gas emissions. Consultants flying around. And so saying with remote mob programming, you can do that stuff remotely. And so I I'm not claiming to be a sustainability super practicer, because mostly because I really like remote programming, and it's nice that it happens to be more sustainable. So yeah, which is
I
cool.
mean, so this is certainly not me going,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to point fingers at anybody. It's just that
Yes.
there's so many things that we could make changes that are not deleterious, they're bad, they're not going to make anything any worse, but they will make some things better. I mean, I believe that there's some math around, how much carbon Zoom actually produces. So I mean, I don't know where it sits in the scale thing. So, but it's not as simple as just do everything online. But there are changes that we could enact, and there are certainly things that our organizations could do around workplaces and policies that could ameliorate the impacts of their business.
1 hour of video conferencing or streaming emits 150 to 1,000 grams of carbon dioxide. That's as much as the equivalent of 11% of the emissions from a gallon of gasoline.
Wow.
It also requires between 2 to 12 liters of water. Very interesting. I don't know.
Yeah,
that was I was quoting that from Fast Company. I don't know if that's how good that
everything
is.
has an impact. Just but we need to understand what, and some things
cloud
are really
computing
beneficial.
and everything. I think the likelihood that a Zoom call is solar energy is much higher than driving around, right? But I think about this, so a long time ago, we kind of say, make it work, then make it right, and then only if there's a problem, make it fast. But I think that there is like a tangible like carbon footprint element of processing optimization, right? And so I think at the very least, as software developers, learning to reduce the amount of processing happening does have a long-term energy impact, especially for large-scale systems, right? So I think for those that have been moving away from optimization since the C++ kind of time frame, I think that there's a renewed focus on optimizing algorithms from the perspective of carbon footprint. So
interesting,
because C++ is resurgent at the moment. I go to the C++ conference most years down in Oxford, and back at the turn of the century, it was looking like we actually started doing other things at the conference, like Agile and C#, just because we didn't think there was going to be enough C++ programmers around. And now I go to it, and it's full of young people, really bright people, getting very excited about new standards. So actually, that's to do with money, not to do with carbon, but nonetheless,
I think because also there's like Rust and Go and all that too. But I just think that if you're conscious about sustainability, optimizing your algorithms is one way to have like a daily habit around. A software developer can have a daily habit around optimizing algorithms here and there, and in theory, you would produce less carbon over the long run.
Although an awful lot of optimizations aren't optimizations at all.
Yes.
And
and
so I think we should restate the basic rule of optimization is don't, and then add the expert clause, which is don't yet. And if you get to that point when you do need to do optimizations, or you think it would be good to save planet, then please measure it and make sure that you aren't making things worse.
Yes, exactly. 100%. One quick thought, and maybe you can get a soundbite on it, Seb, because I know Chris has to close this because of time. But one thought I had was, is there synergy with lean and sustainability? So if you're removing unneeded steps in a process or whatever, does that, like, I think it came from one of the Wordly mapping videos, but like someone was buying machines to process paper because another company was printing it out when in the end of the day, they could have just sent the data to each other or whatever, and so I wonder if there is a synergy between lean and sustainability in that way, but I'm not sure.
So I think probably. I've not thought about it. The one that I would always come back to, again, I've already name checked it once, might want to do it twice. Liz Keogh has a wonderful thought experiment where whenever somebody suggests a process or a piece of software or something that needs to be improved, she immediately starts by saying, if you had an infinite number of pixies, how would you do it? And so you imagine how you would do it, and then optimize in pixie land. And only once you've worked out that there's actually something that needs to be solved by software or document processing or driving to go and see your consultant in another place, only then actually commit carbon to it. Although, to be clear, she wasn't talking about carbon there. She's just talking about let's not write software unless we absolutely need to.
Yeah.
I think it's probably a trade. It can be full of trade-offs, right? So to go really fast, you can get into a jet and fly somewhere, but obviously it's going to have an impact on other things, right? And so you'll produce less carbon by driving something across the United States rather than flying it, but flying it will produce more emissions. So I think lean could go either way, unfortunately, just because the cost, it depends on what you're optimizing with lean, because lean does, it says optimize one thing possibly at the expense of another.
Okay.
So Seb, is there anything that you would like to plug or share before we close out the show?
So we didn't talk about BDD, but myself and Gaspar Nodge have writing a series of books called the BDD book series, which you can find at bddbooks.com. And I'd also like to plug the Socrates series of unconferences, which I believe mainly happen in Europe. But there's that Socrates there, not so much to do with the unexamined life that you were talking about earlier, Austin, but it stands for software craft and test. And these conferences are residential, and they happen generally Friday through Sunday and are really brilliant. So go check out Socrates conferences and come along to one of them.
Awesome. We'll put links in the show notes. And to all of our listeners and viewers, if you know somebody that's a little bit too passionate about what they do, or maybe have a Rolodex of best practices in their back pocket, or maybe they're just wasting a bunch of resources and acting unsustainably, then maybe you'd want to share this episode with them. And for yourself, please like and subscribe and ring that notification bell. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you, Seb, for joining us, and to our viewers, bye.
Bye.
See you.